So we think about blockchain, stablecoin, but at the end of the day, digital currency have many forms. I remember just a couple of months ago, I was in a meeting with the People's Bank of China, and very specifically talking about not stablecoin, but about CBDC, which is yet another form of digital currency that's much more driven at the sovereign level. I know with the association, you've had a lot of opportunities working with regulators and central banks in this area. And I think in India, if I'm not mistaken, the digital rupee is already live and transacting within the system, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you're seeing on the CBDC side and potentially how it correlates with stablecoin that are living on blockchains?
So this is such a hugely important part of conversations, especially with regulators on our side of the world. In fact, it's almost become a debate now of how CBDCs and other technology will exist when it comes to tokenized money. So let me talk a little bit now. Why are the central banks conducting these experiments when we already have other digital forms of payment? I think this is where the crux of the debate and therefore the root cause lies, because we are not solving for inclusion in isolation now. It really doesn't matter whether there is a small village in a very distant part of India. She or he who wants to receive that money or a subsidy really doesn't care how that money is arriving in their bank account or even in terms of cash. What they care about is that subsidy reaching them. And how do we enable that inclusion that we really desire with that subsidy payment can be made in real time or can be made without any pilferages in between. And this is where I feel that CBDCs can really create and solve the problem of inclusion, because inclusion does not mean just providing access to technology which is thereby invisible or it is free. It is about being able to solve for the last mile problem, whether it is an offline payment that can be made, whether it is actually a correspondent agent who hands over the money, but the money should reach the recipient. All the sovereign central banks all across the world are looking at the test of whether we can pursue both sovereignty and inclusion, not at the cost of each other, but holding sovereignty responsible and important enough as a priority to not sacrifice inclusion that is needed with their own form of digital currency, which starts with a retail use case, goes into subsidy. Programmability becomes very important as they look at the use cases to solve the subsidy payouts related issues, and then looking at cross-border, in which the wholesale side of the current way of being able to settle monies between central banks also can be managed via the CBDC route. And think about it again as a progress scale. Why are central banks doing this right now? Because whether we like to hear this or not, the fact is that the current ownership of tokenized money or digital money as we know it is with private players. And as a central bank, you do need to have a certain amount of control on the sovereignty of a national infrastructure, which is critical for various operations that are conducted that need a reliance and there is a large part of the economy and of countries that are dependent on this kind of solution. So I feel CBDCs in many parts of the world will go beyond the pilot stage. The central banks are definitely going to back it, and it is not going to be again an either or between other forms of money and CBDCs. It will be a form of how CBDCs will be able to solve certain use cases which have a G component, which means G2G, G2B, G2C, and thereby is driven directly with central banks backing that up and countries and populations adopting it because they know they have the trust of the central bank behind it.